Heart of Thorns was released in late 2015, bringing with it only 1 month later Guild Wars 2's first raid wing, Spirit Veil. 4 months later we saw Salvation Pass, and 3 months after that Stronghold of the Faithful, thus completing our first raid story arc taking place in the Forsaken Thicket. 8 months later, Wing 4 Bastion of the Penitent was released, taking place in the Woodland Cascades, rounding up all of the raid wings we would see accessible with the Heart of Thorns expansion. Then Path of Fire was released, closely followed by Hall of Chains, taking place in the Underworld, 9 months after the previous raid wing. 10 months later, we're all just about caught up with the release of Mithrite Gambit, the second Path of Fire raid wing set inside of the Mystic Forge. This leaves us with 6 wings total, split across 2 expansions into 22 encounters. I use the word encounters as not all raids are actually bosses. As of the release of Wing 6, every encounter now provides legendary insights or divinations, making the non-boss events definitely worth your while. For raids bound to the Heart of Thorns expansion, you will receive legendary insights, and for Path of Fire raids you will receive legendary divinations. These items are ultimately crafting materials. Once you have enough, they can be used to craft legendary armour and soon accessories. The importance of these rewards, however, is much more significant. The vast majority of the player base use legendary insights, LI for short, as proof of experience. When using the LFG panel to find others to raid with, you will see many stating requirements to join their squad. I'll revisit this later, but for now don't worry too much. There are plenty of LFGs to go around, and most commanders are a lot more accepting of less experienced players than you may think. So, what would make you want to raid? Not only is raiding a personally rewarding and potentially great social experience, like finally getting that boss kill with your squad, it's also very lucrative in terms of in-game rewards. Raiding is by far the fastest and cheapest way to acquire Ascended gear, which has a reasonably high chance to drop from raid encounters, and can also be purchased using Magnetite shards from Heart of Thorns raids and gating crystals from Path of Fire. These 2 currencies are capped per week, 150 Magnetite shards and 100 gating crystals. However, mini-pets which you will drop from bosses can be traded in for more of these currencies, and additionally, you can salvage Ascended items dropped from encounters if you don't need them, which will give you 60 Magnetite shards or gating crystals, which do not count towards your weekly cap. Although the amount of currency gained outside of your cap is pure chance, using these methods will quickly push up your currency stockpiles, allowing you to purchase the gear that you need for your profession choices. In addition to loot, you can also receive a pretty reasonable amount of gold. This varies, but the average you can expect is likely over 70 gold a week. Raiding also provides a large amount of experience, which is super useful for progressing through mastery tracks, in addition to mastery points and valuable loot the first time you take down a boss. If you're new to raiding, you will more likely be interested in the Envoy Armour 1 experimental collection. This collection is very simple once you're able to clear wings 1 to 3. The collection is time gated to 5 weeks minimum, as you will need 5 items which only drop from Gorseval once a week. Completing this collection will reward you with a full chest of Ascended armour on which you can pick any stats you choose. Raids reset at 7:30 AM server time on Mondays. Until this point, you will enter raid wings at a checkpoint after the last boss you killed, unless you get another player to open an instance for you. Regardless of whether you use another player's instance to kill a boss more than once in any given week, you will only receive the good rewards once per week. I'll talk about this more later, but this is the reason many members of the raiding community have multiple Guild Wars 2 accounts to raid on. More accounts, more rewards, more money. If you wish to go even further, you will eventually tackle the challenge mote, CM for short, raids. Beating these for the first time will give you a guaranteed Ascended weapon drop plus free raid food. Selling these items can easily net you 50 gold plus per CM kill in the current economy. Take note of the Call of the Mists. This is an effect where golden experience rewards from boss encounters are doubled. Call of the Mists will always be active on the most recent raid wing, and will rotate around the other raid wings weekly. You can tell which wings currently have the Call of the Mists active by the little blue icon above the portals. So this all sounds great, but let's address the elephant in the room. You may well have heard the horror stories claiming the raid community to be full of toxicity and elitism. Overall, this is not actually true. I don't say this because I have a fair amount of raid experience. I actually remember my baby raiding days very well. Unfortunately, this stigma comes from a small handful of community members who have had unlucky experiences with other players. And these people have every right to voice their experiences, but as with most things in life, complaints are far louder and more widespread than general positivity, even if that positivity exists. The vast majority of commanders and other raiders are generally very accepting, helpful and fair. If you do happen to come across someone you don't get along with, my advice is to just leave and find another group. It's not worth your time getting worked up and doing something you're not going to enjoy. Honestly, most disagreements come from lack of communication and misunderstanding. Let me be clear, communication is very important in raids. Raiding requires teamwork. You'll find that a large majority of commanders will be pretty flexible if you're upfront about your experience, including allowing you to join raid squads where you don't currently meet the LI requirements. Commanders, myself included, tend to be very appreciative of honest players who are willing to put in effort and learn from their mistakes. If you can't do something, just say so. Do not suffer quietly, that is where time gets wasted and people get cranky. Remember the task you're having difficulty with, and make a note to practice it. If you're with a group willing to let you practice a mechanic, like running cannons on Sabbatha for example, go for it. You have nothing to lose and only experience to gain. If it's not going well, request to switch out with someone else, at least you've shown that you're willing to put in the effort. I've only done this once before and I'm willing to try, goes a very long way. No one can rightfully fault you for trying to learn something new. Most pug groups won't use TeamSpeak or Discord for voice chat, and while voice is very helpful, squad chat is a readily available compromise. Pay attention to it. If someone sits quietly in a corner, they make themselves an easy target for a potentially unfriendly raider to flame. All you need is decent communication, and your raiding experience will go 100 times smoother. Raiding with strangers can be daunting at first. You don't even need to communicate a lot if you don't want to. You don't need to be social if you're more of the quiet type. Just make sure to communicate when necessary. The last point I'll bring up for now regarding raid etiquette is to be prepared. This will reduce downtime and make raids go a lot smoother for your team. No one likes waiting around, and downtime is a sure path to making people impatient. Come to a boss with your gear ready and your food. If you're likely to switch characters, leave them in the aerodrome so that you don't have to wait across multiple loading screens. This brings me on to self-teaching and making an effort. Raids have been out for 3 years now. There are an abundance of resources online. All the information you need is out there. And as for the community, Guild Wars 2 has one of the best social and helpful communities in any game I've played. There are a vast amount of players that are willing to help others when asked. With the community and all of the resources available, there hasn't really been a better time to get into raiding. YouTube is filled with videos, including raid encounter guides and boss kills. Popular streamers are frequently raiding on Twitch every day. Dolphy has raid guides, which while not always updated, are still mechanically relevant. Every patch, Snowcrow's put a huge amount of effort into creating optimal builds and guides for the community to use for self-improvement and progression. Do not ignore these resources. A small handful of the community have previously commented on the lack of raid tutorials and direction in-game, pointed out that not much is explained, but frankly, not much is in Guild Wars 2. In my opinion, this is actually part of what makes Guild Wars 2 such a fun and interesting universe. I've played for thousands of hours and I can guarantee you that every minute my PC is on, I still have a wiki page open somewhere. And the wiki is just one of the great resources out there for Guild Wars 2. Overall, the community is passionate and enjoys creating content to help others in the game, and this, I feel, is a far more valuable and enjoyable way to navigate an MMO compared to the game holding your hand all the way. A lot of players don't realise how ArenaNet have put so many elements in the game that subtly teach players mechanics. The Path of Fire expansion contains a lot of open world content, featuring mechanics that would later appear in the next Fractal released in Living World Season 4. Living World Season 3 brought with it meta events containing mechanics from earlier raid wings. A more or less carbon copy of Veil Guardian can be found in Bloodstone Fen, for example. One of the most enjoyable things about endgame content in Guild Wars 2 is not just the challenge but the puzzle. When raids and fractals are first released, the community comes together to solve new mechanics and work out how best to beat encounters. It sounds a little cheesy, but nothing else in Guild Wars quite rivals that little journey of discovery when new content is released. If the developers saw fit to include actual raid tutorials, I feel this would take away a huge element of what makes this community so great to be a part of. And hey, if spending hours discovering the best way to beat a boss is just not for you, you only have to wait a few days until Reddit is filled with other people's experiences and guides anyway. I will be blunt, however, if it so happens that you're not prepared to do a little research and educate yourself on all things raid related, then possibly raiding is not for you. Raiding is endgame content, it is supposed to be difficult, but the elements that make raids hard are not the mechanics themselves, but the necessity for teamwork and knowledge across all 10 squad members. If that's not your thing, then that's absolutely fine. Guild Wars 2 has an insane amount of content to cater to all types of players. As far as MMOs go, Guild Wars 2 covers a very wide and diverse audience. There is something for everyone, and no one says you need to experience all of it to get the most enjoyment out of the game. My advice, however, is to try. See if raiding suits you, stick at it a while, and be prepared to put in a little effort. I'd be willing to bet that after not too long you'll find large amounts of enjoyment and never look back. Now, to revisit raid etiquette and how you can actually get started raiding, there are many training guilds, the most popular which you can find at snowcrows.com/raids/training. These guilds are full of helpful trainers and like-minded trainees and are happy to teach members mechanics on the fly and get them more experience under their belts. However, and I have a feeling this might be a somewhat unpopular opinion due to the aforementioned stigma, it's just as easy to start out raiding using the LFG system. In the LFG, you'll see all of the groups in your region currently looking to fill their squads. You'll notice that most of these LFG posts follow a general format: raid boss or wing, LI requirement, and needed roles. You'll see LFGs specifically for training, in addition to posts without requirement at all. I encourage anyone just starting out to join as many of these as possible. Even if you're not getting boss kills, you're gaining a feel for the mechanics, how bosses function, making it a lot less stressful when you do go for that kill. If you are joining an LFG with a requirement, you're expected to ping your LI. This is done by control-clicking your insights multiple times, 2 or 3 should be sufficient. The reason people do this is to prove that they have these items, as it is not only difficult but also against ArenaNet's terms of service to fake ping in quick succession using a chat code or macro. In addition to insights and divinations, some LFGs will ask for KP, kill proof. These are the tokens you get from bosses when you're representing a guild. If you're not representing a guild, you will not receive them from the boss chest. If you're just starting out, it's a very good idea to keep these tokens, as they will carry a lot more weight towards getting you into an LFG if you have lower LI. If you're feeling confident and wish to join an LFG with a higher requirement than the LI you currently have access to, try shooting the commander a message. In most cases, they will be more than happy to give you a chance. If you do this, however, try to prepare as much as possible for the encounter you're entering, so that you're contributing as much as you can to the team effort. If there is one thing the raid community doesn't take kindly to, it is people joining who do not wish to put in any effort and are only there wanting to get carried through an encounter. As I mentioned before, be honest about your experience and what others can expect from you. If you're communicative and open, you're going to have a much better social experience. If you are having trouble joining LFGs, or you're just not enjoying it, another option is to get a commander tag. This will set you back 300 gold and 250 badges of honour from World v World, which don't take very long to get. This way you can begin and lead your own training runs whenever you please, and it will most likely encourage you to learn faster too. As a side note, you don't actually need a commander tag to start an LFG and enter a raid. However, players tend not to join groups without a visible commander figure. One way to get around this might be to open an LFG and request a commander. Upon joining a squad, certain things are typically expected from players. You can think of these sort of like unwritten rules of LFG raiding. You are expected to have a level of knowledge correlating to the LI requirement of the squad that you wish to join. Every member of the team is expected to put in equal effort and fill their role to the best of their current ability. This does not just mean your level of play, but also your gear and food. The popular builds found online are created for a reason, to squeeze the most out of the profession you're playing. Regarding this, in some situations, quote-unquote incorrect gear can actually cause problems for your raid squad. The most common example would be a druid using gear which contains toughness. Many players may add toughness to their builds to make things a little easier for them, survivability. However, many raid bosses follow the player with the highest toughness, typically the tank. This tank is usually always a chronomancer, and if another player happens to have higher toughness than the intended tank, the boss will then follow this other player instead. This will not end well. This is just one example of a situation where players may question another player's dedication to raiding. Using the correct gear and food is often thought of as being courteous to your fellow squad members. Taking recommended gear will help you get the most out of your classes, and often deviating from these builds for personal gain will make you less effective overall. In addition, using the druid example, if a player was to add toughness due to having difficulty surviving, they're covering up their issue, not solving it. You will never improve if you don't push yourself to conquer mechanics, learn your classes, and avoid damage. To find out the best build for the classes you want to play, there are many places online. The current most popular resource is snowcrows.com. Here you can find every mainstream raid build detailing gear, food, utility, trait lines, skills, and even rotations. Here you will also find raid guides specific to each encounter and the profession you're looking for, advising you what you can do to contribute the most in a fight. Using this information will quickly get you a handle on any class you desire, and over time you can fine-tune your play as you get used to mechanics and practice your rotations. You will notice the gear detailed here is all ascended. These builds are best case scenario, something you'd want to work towards if you're just starting out. For now, exotic armour should do you just fine, most of which can be cheaply crafted or purchased on the trading post. There are however many ways to acquire ascended gear, even if you haven't started raiding yet. Many core game stats, like Berserkers for example, are found at fractal vendors or purchased for guild commendations. Heart of Thorn stats such as Commanders can be grabbed from a little light farming of Living World Season 3 maps. My first port of call is usually Bitterfrost Frontier, where you can acquire accessories, back pieces and rings in return for fresh winterberries. Path of Fire stats like Harriers are much the same in Living World Season 4 maps, and you can easily claim an ascended back piece from the collection after completing the Path of Fire story, the same as you are rewarded an ascended weapon for completing the Knight of the Thorn achievement after the Heart of Thorns story. You can also complete the specialization collections for Heart of Thorns and Path of Fire to be rewarded ascended weapons, typically with quite nice skins. If open world isn't your thing, however, once you start accruing raid currencies, you can purchase pretty much any item you'll need from the exchange operative in the aerodrome, or via Glenna inside of raid instances. For starting out, I'd recommend choosing a class that you're very comfortable with, or that you find relaxing to play. The first thing you need to learn in raids are the mechanics, everything else comes after. If you're trying to learn a new or challenging class while tackling encounters that you haven't seen before, you're going to have a bad time. For example, if you frequently run high-level fractals on Weaver, you may know your class well enough to be able to dive into raids with it. Just bear in mind the playstyle and rotation will vary a lot when moving to a new type of content, thus it is a good idea to check out the profession-specific raid guides mentioned before. For newer players, it is generally recommended that you play a core raiding profession. These are roles that are needed in nearly every encounter. Not only are these fairly accessible for baby raiders, they also make learning new mechanics less of a stressful experience. Typically, for every encounter, regardless of your DPS classes, you will have 2 Chronomancers, 1 Banner Slave, and 1 or 2 Druids. And these roles are fairly sought after, as with any MMO, the overwhelming majority of players instantly lead towards playing DPS. Druid, for example, is easy to play, but also has a high skill ceiling if you want to be really good. You'll find it a lot easier to join groups, even if you don't meet the requirement with these core roles, as DPS spots tend to fill very quickly. My advice would be to pick something that you will find enjoyable to play, and relaxing enough that you can concentrate on mechanics. After all, if you're dead, you're not contributing to the fight. However, don't stick to your choice for too long, don't be that one-trick pony. A large part of raiding is versatility and flexibility. I encourage you to branch out and try new things, new roles, new mechanics. Not only will this increase your experience tenfold, but it will also enable you to find groups more easily, as you'll be able to fill more of the roles that they require. Once you've chosen and geared a profession which you wish to play, it's a good idea to visit the Special Forces training area in the aerodrome. You can start a raid squad without a tag to enter. In here you will find a couple of consoles enabling you to set up a training golem. You can use this to practice rotations and get a feel for your role before diving into a real raid encounter. If you are practicing DPS rotations, you'll want to set up the golem, and yourself, to be as close as possible to a raid encounter scenario. This includes conditions on the boss and boons on yourself. You can find this information at snowcrows.com/benchmarks. Upon entering a raid, there are a couple of things to note which you may need to prepare. A handful of raid mechanics require a certain mastery track to be complete. Most notably is updraft use in the gliding track. You'll find it pretty hard to complete Wing 1 smoothly without it. Later on, you will also need leyline gliding from the same track to tackle Zera, the last boss of Wing 3. Bouncing mushrooms, Itzel poison lore, and adrenal mushrooms are also very helpful, but not 100% necessary to start off. And I would recommend completing the entirety of the raid's mastery track too. This will make your life a lot easier and doesn't require much XP at all. Remember, you get a ton of XP and HOT mastery points the first time you kill a boss. As mentioned before, there is a lot you can do outside of the game to help you. One thing I recommend to raiders starting out is to record their gameplay, and watch it back at a later date to see what you could improve upon. Also, this is a great way to see how much you progress in skill and knowledge over time. In addition to the abundance of guides, videos, and information available online, there are a couple of optional tools which you may also want to check out. The most popular by far is Arc DPS. This is a DPS meter which will show you damage stats, amongst many other things for your squad. If you do wish to use this, try to use it for self-improvement rather than flaming other players. In any case, you can hide the DPS window. The most useful feature of Arc DPS is generating combat logs. These can then be uploaded to websites such as DPS Report or Radar, providing you with a wealth of information on your encounter, even including a combat replay. This makes it very easy to pinpoint areas that you could improve upon. Arc DPS also has an optional add-on, Build Templates. This enables you to save gear, traits, and skills in profiles and easily switch between them. These are not difficult to install, you only have to drag and drop one file into your game directory. Note that you will need to update this with nearly every Guild Wars 2 patch, otherwise it may cause your game to crash. Another popular add-on is TACO, Guild Wars 2 Tactical Overlay. This is very useful for less experienced raiders, as it will overlay information on top of your games, such as key positions and timings that you may need. Note that these add-ons are third-party, they're not developed by ArenaNet, and as such, ArenaNet will not provide support for them if you have any issues. While ArenaNet has unofficially sanctioned the use of these tools, they do not alter game files, and they will only display information that your client provides, and therefore do not break the Guild Wars 2 terms of service. ArenaNet do not have control over the development of them, and therefore players use them at their own risk of errors or instability. One tool I would advise anyone to check out though, is Guild Wars 2 Efficiency. Efficiency will tell you a ton of information about your account, including items you have, achievements, the cheapest way to craft things, pretty much all the information you can find in game, plus so much more. Most notably for raids, you can view which raid bosses you've killed this week, helping you easily keep track of what you're missing. Now, you may be just about ready to jump into raids. A few things to keep in mind. As mentioned, you can only get your rewards from an encounter once per week. If you beat boss 1 and 2 from Wing 1 for example, the next time you enter that instance, you will spawn before boss 3. If you do wish to kill a boss more than once per week, you'll need to find someone to open the instance with the boss in question undefeated for you. This can be done by the player in question joining your squad and entering the raid wing before anyone else. This player must enter the raid wing and pass the loading screen for this to work. If any other player enters and loads faster, the instance will open at the checkpoint of whichever player finishes loading first. Never underestimate game sound. Audio cues in raids are just as important as visual cues and will go a long way to helping you react faster to mechanics. The more you raid, the more you will react to these like a second nature, even if something visual stops you from spotting a certain tell for a mechanic. Speaking of visuals, there are a few things in game you could do to help you out. Raid encounters typically see players all bunched up together, which can create a lot of visual noise if you're trying to notice tells. One option to remedy this is to disable player nameplates, or use smaller health bars. This is a trade-off, however, as seeing which players are where at any given moment can be very useful, especially if you're playing a support class. As for typical mechanics, green equals useful, orange equals painful. Try your best to avoid damage where possible. Walking out of AoEs is the best option. You can dodge if necessary, but don't rely on this as you may run out of endurance when you need it most. Dodging also interrupts your skills, simply moving out of a mechanic generally does so less often. Now go, be free, start your raiding career, smash some bosses.